Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. For who is there so cold that a nation's sympathy could not warm him? Who so obdurate and dead to the claims of gratitude that would not thankfully acknowledge such priceless benefits? Who so stolid and selfish that would not give his voice to swell the hallelujahs of a nation's jubilee when the chains of servitude had been torn from his limbs? I am not that man. Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions, whose chains, heavy and grievous, yesterday are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. If I do forget, if I do not faithfully remember those bleeding children of sorrow this day, may my right hand forget her cunning, and may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking. It would make me a reproach before God and the world. My subject, then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day in its popular characteristics from the slave's point of view, standing there, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism a sham, your humanity a base pretense, and your Christianity a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion. It makes your name a hissing and a byword to a mocking earth. It is the antagonistic force in your government, the only thing that seriously disturbs and endangers your union. It fetters your progress. It is the enemy of improvement, the deadly foe of education. It fosters pride, it breeds insolence, it promotes vice, it shelters crime. It is a curse to the earth that supports it, and yet you cling to it as if it were the sheet anchor of all your hopes. Oh, be warned, be warned. A horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from you the hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy it forever. Fellow citizens, there is no matter in respect to which the people of the North have allowed themselves to be so ruinously imposed upon, as that as of the pro-slavery character of the Constitution. In that instrument I hold there is neither warrant, license, nor sanction of the hateful thing, but interpreted as it ought to be interpreted, the Constitution is a glorious liberty document. Read its preamble. Consider its purposes. Is slavery among them? While I do not intend to argue this question on the present occasion, let me ask, if it be not somewhat singular that if the Constitution were intended to be, by its framers and adopters, a slave-holding instrument, why neither slavery, slaveholding, nor slave can anywhere be found in it? I hope that every American has a right to form an opinion of the Constitution, and to propagate that opinion, and to use all honorable means to make his opinion the prevailing one. Now take the Constitution according to its plain reading, and I defy the presentation of a single pro-slavery clause in it. On the other hand, it will be found to contain principles and purposes entirely hostile to the existence of slavery. Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. The arm of the Lord is not shortened, and the doom of slavery is certain. I therefore leave where I began, with hope, while drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions. My spirit is also cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. All right, y'all, welcome to episode 2 of On Freedom. a podcast that I recently launched, celebrating, honoring, going back to our history, right? And really giving reverence to freedom fighters throughout American history. My name is Marissa Price. I am a Black woman liberation coach. I am a social worker. I am a healer by spiritual birthright. And yes, welcome to the second episode of On Freedom. Today is the 4th of July, which is the day of American independence. If you are from the U.S., if you live in the U.S., if you're born in the U.S., you know all about the 4th of July. So today we're going to talk about this incredible speech that Frederick Douglass gave in 1852, June of 1852, in Rochester, New York, called What to the Slaves is the 4th of July. Now, this was a speech that I first came across as a college student. So one of my majors was Black Studies, and I'm kind of returning to my roots and unearthing the parts that I had forgotten, that I had lost. If you know anything about my history in Black Studies, because I did write an article on my Substack blog, which I will link in the description section as well, about my experiences encountering sexism and misogyny in Black Studies, which is very real, and how it kind of put me off the path of my destiny. I always knew that part of me was called to bring forth the history and stories of my ancestors, and so having this opportunity to really go back and reclaim those parts of myself and realize that I have the knowledge. It's just been lying dormant, but I can go back and get it at any time. And this is what I'm doing with this podcast. And so I'm so grateful for you listening. If you're listening on 4th of July or later, I would love for you to like this podcast, to share it, to comment below with your experiences, either celebrating or what do you do on the 4th of July? I would love to know, because I know a lot of us don't resonate with the term celebrate, right? It doesn't feel correct to say celebrate for a lot of us. So a lot of us do different things on the 4th of July. So I'd love to hear your experiences, what you do on the 4th of July in the comment section if you'd like to share. But yeah, let's talk about freedom and the 4th of July and celebrating it as, or not celebrating, but even coming upon this day, right, as a descendant of people who were enslaved by the U.S., in the U.S., forcibly stripped from their homelands in West Africa, trafficked across an ocean in unspeakable conditions, shipped in container ships, in conditions worse than cargo is shipped, not given room to breathe, space to have, normal human functions. And the fact that my ancestors survived that journey through the Atlantic, that forced journey, I don't have any words for that. I am proud, I am humbled, I am in shock. I'm still in shock the more that I think about the conditions that they survived. We hear some messaging around there being shame, and that really hurts me. There being shame around the fact that our ancestors were enslaved. The shame rests with the enslavers. The shame rests with the enslavers. I will forever take pride, honor, uplift, give reverence to my ancestors who survived unsurvivable conditions. Honestly, those conditions were not meant for human beings to survive. And yet here I am. Here I am sharing their stories, channeling their messages that they send to me, which is another room of evolution for me in the past year and a half, since working with Coach Yolanda. Shout out to Coach Yolanda on YouTube. I will link her channel in the description section, but she really introduced me to the fact that my ancestors are always with me, right? Creating stuff like an altar to honor your ancestors, even though a lot of us don't know their names. And ancestors also do not have to be generations back. It can be, one generation. It can be close. But for those of us who don't know the people who came before us, we don't know their names, we don't know their stories, we don't know exactly where they came from as a byproduct of enslavement. This is the remnant of enslavement that we don't know where our ancestors are from exactly. This is not normal. With tradition, with oral tradition, passing down family histories, we should know. We should know. The institution of slavery damaged so many family ties. But the good news, and something that Coach Yolanda helped me work through and recognize, is I don't need to know the facts because I feel them. I channel their messages, and something that she shared with me that changed my life. I am here to, one of the reasons, right, is to put forth some of the things that they experienced. And that's why I can never rest. I can never rest. And even being in a toxic job, given the task of teaching people, often, Black history, and the ways in which it shows up and impacts how the field of community development exists and functions. And that's a whole other podcast. Shout out to Nakia for that phrase, but that's a whole other podcast talking about the roots of community development rooted in the Black Power movement and how they have completely tarnished, co-opted language coming out of Black liberation struggles in the 70s to what we now see as a field of community development today, looking absolutely nothing like it was intended to, which is the case for a lot of things in the U.S. But that's that's an aside. But I have always had this very strong voice within me in growing up in the environments where that voice was not always welcome. It was silenced a lot. That led me to experience things like what is termed depression at a very young age. Because these voices, right, these messages that I have received, now that I know that they are ancestral, now that I know I'm here to relay stories, experiences, now I'm not silencing that. And now I'm letting it kind of be free. Be free. And that just brings up a question that y'all may want to sit with. What messages are you here to relay? What experiences could people not share before you that now you have the opportunity, you have the voice, you have the freedom to put forth what they experienced in plain language and say it just straightforward? Right? What messages are those? Just something to sit with. But getting back to the topic, right? What to the slave is the 4th of July? Frederick Douglass's speech, 1852, on the 76th anniversary of the signing of the U.S. Declaration of Independence in front of the Rochester Ladies Anti-Slavery Society. What must that have been like? And just a little bit on Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was an orator. He was a leader. He was an intellectual, an abolitionist. He was also one of I believe the last president of the Freedmen's Bank, which I mentioned in my first episode of the podcast with Alicia Renice about the Freedmen's Bank. The epic failure of the bank that was supposed to be set up to provide a place for people who were formerly enslaved to place their deposits. the Freedmen's Bank failed. And at the last minute, basically, Frederick Douglass was put in charge. He was given the role of president of the Freedmen's Bank after it had already gotten to the point where it could not operate anymore, which is egregious to me. And there are some things to be said about Frederick Douglass. Critiques, absolutely. But to place someone who had such a prominent position as the head of the Freedmen's Bank, again, set up during Reconstruction as a way for formerly enslaved individuals to place their deposits. The first time a lot of people had interacted with a bank or a financial institution at all, and it failed, and those deposits were never recovered. So what does that do? What does that do? Seeing someone who is such a prominent figure be the president of a bank that did not live up to any of its promises. And we see the lack of trust in financial institutions, even to this day, going all the way back to the failure, the deliberate, intentional failure. This was not an accident. This was not someone's oversight. It was not set up properly to hold deposits. And I read a comment from someone on the last podcast. Thank you so much for leaving that comment about a lot of those deposits were actually stolen. So what does that do? Just another thing that brought up for me. So Frederick Douglass in his speech says that the 4th of July is not a holiday that enslaved people should be celebrating, formerly enslaved people. So what does it mean for the descendants of people who were enslaved? How should we view the 4th of July? I have no answers, only questions. Questions that I'm reflecting on as I'm thinking about the 4th of July, especially now being abroad in Guadalajara, Mexico, and kind of having a vantage point of the U.S. that I've never had before. Now being outside and making trips back and having to put on the armor again, having to deal with the rudeness that is distinctly American, coming back into that and then leaving and having epiphanies every time about the things that I encountered and endured that were absolutely not normal in any sense, but they were normalized. And one of those things is the way that freedom is regarded, especially on the 4th of July in the U.S. You see freedom everywhere, right? Celebrating our freedom, independence from Great Britain. Celebrating people not wanting to pay taxes to the monarchy. And so they decided to do their own thing. Like it was really that. Can we celebrate the independence of a country that denied us our freedom? A human right. Can we? Again, no answers, just questions. And I would love to hear your responses and reflections in the comments as well. But what are we really celebrating? What is the 4th of July? Our ancestors were trafficked across an entire ocean, the transatlantic slave trade. A lot of our ancestors made their first stops. And just to pause here, if you have done any reading or studying in Black studies, you know that Afrofuturism is, there's a lot of text and just the way that the transatlantic slave trade is depicted as if it's like an alien invasion. I mean, think about, you have never seen this shade of people before just coming on your land, your home, your shores. A lot of the times trusting people who betrayed you. And then to see these folks come on. I mean, even just sitting here thinking about that, right? What must that have been like? I don't think we spend enough time really sitting with that. That was an alien invasion for all intents and purposes, right? You have never seen people who look like this, and all of a sudden they're coming here, putting you in chains, doing vile acts to your body, treating you as if you're not human, cutting you off from your family, your community, treating you worse than cargo, throwing you on a ship, tightening your chains. You don't see the light of day for weeks, maybe months. A lot of our ancestors were taken to the Caribbean forcibly first, during a process called seasoning. And seasoning is essentially the breaking of minds, the psychological torture element of slavery, to convince you that you don't deserve human dignity, that you are not human anymore, that there is no creator, and the only person you can look up to and look for guidance is your enslaver. This was an entire systematic process of breaking our minds, attempting to. Because the fact that we're still here in 2024 telling the stories of our ancestors boldly means that didn't work. It didn't work. No matter what tactics they used, no matter what inhuman ways they functioned to try to break their minds, something still lived. The knowing that that was wrong. The understanding that that is evil. And that was passed down generation through generation in different ways. And here we are in 2024 telling their stories and saying the same things that they said. The power in that. There is so much power in that. So what are the effects of seasoning? How does the trauma of enslavement continue to live on? The field of epigenetics studies how the trauma of our ancestors still lives in our bones and our DNA, affects our health. Generations back, that trauma doesn't go anywhere. We know that in utero, if a person who is pregnant with a baby, right, is stressed, that stress passes down to the fetus. And so on and so forth through generation. That trauma doesn't go anywhere. It's never had a chance to be resolved, to be healed. So what are the impacts of that? And on 4th of July, what are we celebrating? How are we thinking about this day? Again, when we see freedom signs all around us, we see fireworks where the flag is everywhere. What to the slave or the descendants of people who were enslaved is the 4th of July? Questions for you. And as I'm wrapping up the second episode of On Freedom, again, my new podcast, which I would love for you to like, share with other people who may be interested in this topic. I would love to know how you regard the 4th of July. We can learn so much from the people who came before us, such as Frederick Douglass, who made the speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," again in 1852 in Rochester, New York, boldly asking a room of members of the Rochester Ladies Anti-Slavery Society on the 76th anniversary of the signing of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." Frederick Douglass escaped slavery. He was a son of a woman who was enslaved and the son of his enslaver. And he escaped slavery in Maryland. And to see the course of his life, if you all have the chance to read any of his books, I would urge you to do so, any of his firsthand accounts, to see him wind up at the point in 1852 to ask this question. Before the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, he was asking this crowd, what are we celebrating? What hypocrisy to have a day marking the Day of Independence when there's a large portion of your population that was responsible for building your country that is still not free. That is still not free. So just things to sit with, to reflect on as we are on July 4th. If you're watching this on July 4th, or later if you're watching after. But yeah, things to sit with, things I'm thinking about. What does freedom mean? What does it mean to the descendants of people who were enslaved? Thank you all for listening to, again, the second episode of my On Freedom podcast. My name is Marissa Price. I am a liberation coach supporting the healing and spiritual evolution of Black women and femmes. And thank you so much for listening.